So welcome everyone, good morning. Really exciting to see all of your pictures, names, faces. Today is our third community conversation. In some ways, we haven't had a community conversation for Cal Coaching Network since October of 2020. We've been doing a lot of like smaller type of practices, and now we're here starting this again with the community conversation. So that means that you will, be kind of like listening for the most part. At the end, we will have a Q&A, and I'll go over this in a little while. And we'll go over what the title of this is, and as well as like some information about the Cal Coaching Network and some learning outcomes that we're hoping that you'll walk away with. And the other thing that's happening is that we're going to be putting an assessment in the chat and probably following up over email with it if you don't have time today to fill it out. But it really helps inform our programming, and it also really helps inform kind of what our next July conversation or event is going to be like, because it's going to kind of be a through line based on this conversation today. And people who didn't attend today, it'll be fine. We're going to make it so that even if they didn't attend today, they'll be able to have a debrief around these topics that we hear today. So again, welcome. Good morning, everyone. It's 11:07 on my computer, which I've heard that is sometimes 1 minute behind. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to Community Conversation for Cal Coaching Network. Today, our title is Storytelling, Personal Experiences and Approaches to Coaching and Coachability. And I'd like to start, first of all, with a very important land acknowledgement, which is I'm hoping, our intention is that this is not performative, that more this is a reminder of action that we each are responsible for taking. Some of that is learning, some of that is engaging in conversation, and even engaging in this website where the link is listed here, where the land acknowledgement was written. So I'll go ahead and start. UC Berkeley sits on the territory of Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other familial descendants of the Verona Band. The Cal Coaching Network recognizes that every member of the Berkeley community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. Consistent with our values of community, inclusion, and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. As members of the Berkeley community, it is vitally important that we not only recognize the history of the land on which we stand, but also we recognize that the Muwekma Ohlone people are alive and flourishing members of the Berkeley and broader Bay Area communities today. And this acknowledgement is a written and verbal call to action, as words are not sufficient. It was co-created with the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and Native American Student Development and is a living document. And if I could ask Colin to just drop the link in the chat if you haven't done so already. Thank you so much. And I think just to get started, we are going to ask during the conversation if people can put in questions over chat, and the other, or thoughts, kudos, being respectful. I also wanted to say that if you wanted to introduce yourselves to your names, maybe pronouns if you're comfortable, and then maybe your title or a unit on campus or beyond. Then we may be having people who are not on campus right now. The next thing that we have is our welcome. So the Cal Coaching Network, we are a community of practice. And I just wanted to go over this just a little bit so that you're familiar. Our mission is to bring managers and staff who have an interest in developing their coaching and coachability skills. Also to have learning sessions and community conversations on various areas of coaching. And also to provide a courageous skills practice community and opportunity. Our programs and learning, we do have monthly newsletters. We have coaching and coachability skills practice. We do also have trainings and workshops and community conversations like the one you're all attending now. And we are also working in conjunction with other partners on campus on an equity-oriented coaching certificate pilot in 2022. So that's coming pretty soon. We're partnering with the academic advising coaching side led by Andrew Phuong, who's one of our panelists today. And we're hoping to align language and approach as much as possible, but the needs are a little bit different for student-facing things and as well as the things that we have for staff-facing and peer coaching. And today's learning outcomes, we have 3 learning outcomes. So one is that we hope you reflect on one story, at least from today, that resonates with you. Then that you'll consider how to apply or practice in your work. We'll hope you'll be able to name at least one thing you will change in your approach to coaching or coachability. And also, we would like you to consider 1 or 2 things that would be beneficial to you as you evolve in your coaching and coachability practice. And with that, I think we're going to get started. So my name is Isela Peña-Rager. I use she, her, ella pronouns. I'm an assistant director at the LNS Advising, which is the College of Letters and Science Office of Undergraduate Advising. And my role today is co-chair to the Cal Coaching Network, which we affectionately call CCN. And I'm here with Colin Gerker-Jinsei, who is my co-chair. Colin, do you just want to unmute yourself to say hi?
Really just wanted to say hey. Glad to be with you all
today. Colin is working the magic behind the scenes, helping us run this whole thing smoothly. And I will start by asking the question to our panelists. Why do people need coaching? And Alicia, would you introduce yourself and start us off with why do people need coaching?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. Happy to see some familiar faces. My name is Alicia Mandac. I am the Assistant Director of Undergraduate Student Services in the Department of Economics, she, her pronouns. And this question was interesting, Isela, as sort of the prep question. And my response is going to be that actually the answer to that question lies within the person. So coaching can be really helpful to gain some clarity about what you need for growth and change, but really the need is determined by the person. And there can be some times when you ask yourself that question and you can say, I don't need a coach right now. I need something else, but just even being in that space to reflect on that. So that's what I'll offer to start, and excited to be here.
Thank you so much, Alicia. Andrew.
Happy Thursday, everyone. My name is Andrew Phuong, and my pronouns are he, him, his. And I'm a Chancellor's Fellow Consultant Program Developer, working with Bautista on the Division of Equity and Inclusion. And then I'm also a doctoral student in the Graduate School of Education. And I'm going to agree with Alicia on this one, because what I've seen just based on my research and work, for context, I do research on teaching and learning in higher education, mentoring, but also counseling and coaching strategies as well. And one thing that I've noticed is people tend to thrive when they can find a coach that really works for them and is able to be responsive to their needs and their situation. And, some people, can thrive with what we might call a traditional coach, and some people might, thrive informally through other means that might be more effective for them based on their context. But, in my personal opinion, I feel that, coaches are super important because we want to be able to kind of use coaches and leverage coaches in the coaching to really build our networks, our skills, and really developing social emotional competencies, or becoming more self-aware of our strengths, areas for growth, and, time management, and just how are we interacting and being, and working with people. And I think that's super key, because sometimes, like in the workplace and in educational spaces, we tend to value, academic or, workplace competencies. But sometimes like that human-to-human interaction and those social emotional competencies and the ways we work with each other are super key. So, a coach is super effective at being able to really give us the tools to reinterpret and respond to fear, failure, challenges, excitement, and also just our general lived experiences. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Alicia and Andrew, so far. Our next panelist is Angela. Go for it.
Hi, everybody. My name is Angela Stopper. I'm the Chief Learning Officer here at UC Berkeley. I use she, her pronouns. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I just want to kind of support up what Alicia and Andrew have said and add, there are times in our lives when we need coaches. There's times when we need mentors. There's times when we need advisors and we need supporters and we need champions. Coaching is a really important piece of that portfolio of your strategic network that helps you to be successful. And what I think is so special about coaching is a coach asks you questions, asks you really deep questions, and you have to come up with the answers. So by having a coaching relationship that works for you, you get to practice a competency that we don't practice with mentors or advisors or supporters. It is really a personal exercise in growing our own abilities to answer strategic questions and to build plans, focusing very personally on what our goals are and what we want. You know, a mentor will ask you questions and then give you advice. A really good coach will ask you questions and ask you questions and ask you questions and build your muscle to figure out how you can build a strategic plan that works for you, how you can answer those questions that work for you. And I think that's a really, really important competency to have as we kind of manage our lives as professionals.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Angela. And we're going to go on to Jan.
Morning, everyone. My name is Carmelo Bautista. I use he and they pronouns. I'm the degree completion counselor for the Educational Opportunity Program. And yeah, I'm glad that I'm coming in a little bit after these wonderful panelists, because all I will say is completely agree, right? I think what I'll add is, I don't know, there's so many different reasons why people need a coach, but I will say it is such a beautiful thing to hear when someone says, I need a coach, right? And for me, I think what I hear in that, embedded in that statement, is just an awareness of one's capacity for growth, right? That someone is in tune with their malleability and ability to grow. And also just this awareness of not having to do this alone, right? That there is a deep desire to connect with someone. And just this recognition that coaching is all about positive behavioral change, right? And it relies on our belief that we can change, we can grow, we can be more than what we are now.
Just such a gorgeous addition. Thank you so much for that. Always talking about community, Jan. Thank you. Liat, you're up.
Hey everybody, Liat Wexler. My pronouns are they, them. And I am the prevention manager for faculty and staff with the Path to Care Center. And just to build on literally everybody's comments here, I would add just that, you know, sometimes people actually need a therapist, you know, and that is a different role. And I think that, if you're digging into some deep stuff from your past or the ways it's maybe impacting current relationships, a therapist might be a more appropriate fit than a coach. But a coach is really somebody who can challenge you through change and help support you in that very particular experience of growth and change that I think Jan sort of spoke to really well. So yeah, it's great to be here, everybody.
Awesome. Another great person, Liat. And thank you for bringing up challenge and also, differentiating even more from other needs that people may have. And last but certainly not least, Winnie.
Hello, everybody. Oh, what happened? Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. I hit the wrong button. Hello, everybody. My name is Winnie Kwofie, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm coming from California State, East Bay. I'll call us cousins to Berkeley, if you like. And I'm so excited to be here. And right now, I'm just thinking and reflecting on what all my colleagues are saying, and I'm going, oh my God, what do I add? I think you said it all. And so I'll say dito to that. So I'll just do a summary of what I think coaching is to me. I want you to think about it as a self-assessment journey. Where am I today? And then a self-actualization. What do I want to do for myself? And how do I know that I fulfilled that? So from where you are today and where you want to be tomorrow, that's the map, that's the guide, that's that person that you engage that will help you navigate through, whether it's social, emotional, skills, professional, to get there. So it requires a lot of self, like Angela said, it's a lot of self-reflection, a self-admission of what do I know today? Where am I struggling today? What is it that would be helpful to me? And then having that clear goal of where you want to be and being willing to be vulnerable, to be able to hear, to be able to accept, even when it's not very comfortable, so that you can grow through the experience. To me, that is what coaching is. And I'm glad to be here, so thank you.
Thank you, Winnie. We're so happy that you're here with us from Cal State East Bay. And I'm gonna go ahead and start with a question for you, actually. And I was wondering if you could please tell us about the importance of your own self-reflection, learning, growth, and how that informs your coaching approach, especially when it comes to understanding our own privileges, identities, powers.
So I will start by giving a little bit of my story. So one of the things that in terms of reflection of what I like to do or I thrive in doing is I like to get a lot of things done. So I get excited when, there's all these funny ideas and, I'm so excited, I jump in and it's all, let's go, let's do it. So most, in my career some years ago, I had a conversation with my staff and I said, can you guys tell me how you feel about the way I manage, right? And they gave me the word, you're pushy. I'm going, oh, how do I become pushy when I'm so excited and I'm willing and all that, right? And for me, it was one, an eye opener, but two, I didn't want to accept it. Because at the end of the day, you want to get the things done, right? But then it hit me. What is more important, getting the things done or bringing people with you? Because if I want to be a leader and I want to lead, it's not just about the results. It's about the people who are motivated and excited about the journey. So that's where I started. I started by trying to be more aware of what is it that I'm doing? What is it that I'm excited about? Where is my team on this? And how do I bring them into the conversation? Also understanding their strength. And I'm the student, they are not, right? Because sometimes we tend to look at people and say, well, you need to change. No, I am the student. So for me, it was, what do I need to learn from this process? And that was the exciting part about me as I learned about coaching for myself, because without that, there's no way I can coach my staff, because I have to be able to accept, I have to be able to get that feedback and be able to process. Then it gives me a sense of, okay, now I'm also able to share that same story and experience with others so they don't know, you don't want to be there. You're the super person. No, you're not, right? The other area also that I'm mindful of is that our positions sometimes tend to overwhelm people, right? So sometimes because of your position, they assume when you give them advice, they should take it. And that's not coaching, that's giving directions or instructions. So being a coach is being able to have some kind of an appeal with a person. It's a privilege to be a coach. It's not a right. So I see it in that sense of understanding in that moment or in that situation, whether I am a coach or am I in my position giving instructions. And that's very critical for self-awareness.
Thank you, Winnie. So one thing that I wanted to highlight was just, that idea of making sure that the team knows, right? And asking, like, how is this working? Just a lot of this idea of self-awareness. I got getting things done, results versus people. And so focusing on the people aspect, and then shedding that super person idea. So that's sort of like the summary of some of the highlights of what you shared. And Alicia, from there, I'm going to ask you, how have you found your voice approach as a coach?
Yeah, thank you. And Winnie, I'm just like writing notes down and I'm like, oh, I have like chills as you're talking. It's just so great. To kind of carry on what Winnie was saying and to add into sort of finding your voice, it really is about understanding that when I'm coming to the coaching conversation, I'm not the expert there. And I think that that's a really important way into coaching and something that is necessary to be able to even find your voice. And for me, when I was sort of coming to what it meant for me to be a coach, to be honest, I had to quiet my own voice, if that makes any sense, because I am somebody that I'm in academic advising, and I have this theory that people that go into academic advising, we just want to help, but what it creates is this what's called the writing reflex, RIGHT, which is I'm taking from a motivational interviewing training that I have, but it is this reflex to want to fix things and to want to make things right and to come at it at, oh my gosh, I see what you need for help, and so I'm going to tell you what to do. But that in itself, to Winnie's point, is making it about you, right? And you need to listen to what people need for themselves, because there's just no way that you can know. And so really, to find my own voice, I had to quiet my voice and listen more, ask more questions, and really practice. And that's the thing that allowed myself to stay in this space, that anytime I'm coaching, I'm actually always practicing. It's always a practice. So that means that we're all in a space to learn together. I'm learning from the person that I'm coaching, and I'm learning about my own coaching style. And the last thing that I would add in there is also my own mindfulness practice comes in as well. So I was having a side conversation with Colin about this, that mindfulness and coaching tend to go quite hand in hand, because when you're in that coaching space, you do have to be able to be very present with yourself. Oh my gosh, is that writing reflex coming up, or am I wanting to give advice, or am I getting kind of caught up in the emotions of it? And you got to kind of slow yourself down and really pay attention to what the process is happening in front of you, and sort of be very present with it. And so for me, my mindfulness practice has also really helped in the coaching realm. And it also helps me stay just in that practice zone, because it lowers the bar and it makes it more about our growth and learning, and being present for the person that I'm coaching.
Thank you so much, Alicia, for kind of highlighting the kind of necessity to practice, and also for just talking about the writing reflex and spelling it out, so that I didn't confuse it with something else, and our audience doesn't either. This is wonderful. Wonderful insights. And you're getting a bunch of snaps, I think, from Liat in the chat. And so I'm going to go to Liat next. And I'm going to ask, Liat, in your opinion, what are some ways that a coachee, so the person being coached, can prepare to be coached?
I think that well, I'll share for myself. I mean, when I prepare to be coached, I take a moment and actually do some mindfulness work. So building off of what Alicia is saying, and part of it is about getting into the frame of ready for the hard questions, ready to dig. So it's about quieting some of the anxieties, and knowing that it's going to be challenging, but also really fulfilling and positive. I mean, I think everybody approaches it differently, so I don't know that my solution or my strategy is true for all, but I do think that, for someone who's never been coached before, it might be helpful to understand what a coaching framework might look like. So if that's a kind of a first time experience, or even asking the coach to send, a blurb about, their process and what kinds of things they might do in the session. It might be preparing by writing down the number one biggest challenge or decision that you're trying to make. It might be that you try to narrow it to your top 3 concerns or things that you're facing. But I think part of it is knowing that you're going to have focused time to work on a challenge or a decision or an area of growth, and thinking about how you want to use that time, I think can be a great way to prepare.
Thank you so much, Liat. I'm wondering too, if Angela, you wanted to add anything to that same question about how a coachee can prepare to be coached. And then I'll have a second part for you, is how does your coaching approach change when you're faced with a coachee who maybe is displaying resistance or even apathy?
Yeah, I think Liat's spot on. You know, when you're getting ready for a coaching conversation, first know what that coaching conversation is. Know the difference between a mentor and a coach. Know what you're asking for, because there are definitely times when I don't want someone to ask me hard questions and lead me to an answer that's inside that I can find. There's sometimes where I just really need help and I really need someone to tell me what to do. So I think, you know, and sometimes I just really need therapy and I need someone to just listen to me. And sometimes I really just need a cheerleader. And you know, so I think you're exactly right. Knowing what you need. So being self-aware, knowing what you need, and having some of that preparatory work, you know, thinking about what are your questions, what are your challenges, so that can help you figure out what the solution is that you're actually looking for, can be really helpful. So just wanted to lift up everything that Liat said. And then as I think about, you know, if I'm acting as a coach with someone who might be less excited to be coached or even resistant to it, I think it's really important to take a pause, because coaching isn't about me helping, as Alicia was saying. It's not, and Winnie was saying, it's not me, you know, helping and fixing and writing. It's about you, the coachee, going through the strategic exercise of building and strengthening that competency within yourself to explore and answer questions. And if you're not ready for that, that's okay. And as a good coach, I think it's okay to say, you know, I'm listening to you and I'm asking you questions, and I'm sensing some resistance to you know, wanting to answer those, and that's okay. But in order for this to work, in order for this coaching conversation to get you to where I think you want to go, or where you asked to go, we're going to need to take a step back and make sure that you are willing, you know, and maybe exploring why that resistance is there. Do you not have a trusting relationship with the person who's trying to coach you? If trust isn't there, the coaching isn't going to happen. You know, are you just having a bad day? Have you just had to make 300 decisions the hour before the coaching conversation came, and you're kind of done making decisions? You just need a minute to not have to find the answer yourself. All of those things can come up for us every day. And so I think as a coach, if you're noticing some of that in the person that you're talking to, if it's a peer or anybody that you're talking to in that coaching conversation, it's important to note it and call it out and have a conversation about why it's happening, and then maybe think about a different way forward, or rescheduling, you know, the coaching work for a different time.
Thank you, Angela, for kind of giving that open, you know, kind of openness, open door for different possibilities that we may not have thought of. And it looks like maybe you talking possibly had a little bit more activation for Liat. And so Liat, I wanted to give you an opportunity to jump in. Go for it.
Yeah, you know, I really, I want to build off of that, because I think that your point, Angela, about all the many, many reasons that resistance can show up is really key. I don't think that sometimes we assume that the resistance is about us as the coach, or that someone just doesn't want change, but that's almost never really the problem. And so I'm also really glad that you mentioned the trust between the coach and the coachee. One of the things that I've learned from motivational interviewing, which is why I was plussing it so hard before, is a concept called rolling with resistance, that I think is so valuable. And it's exactly what you were talking about, Angela, where you don't push up against it because you actually don't want to become the resistance yourself as the coach, right? You don't want to put yourself in the way and be the thing that someone now pushes against. So instead you roll with it, you allow it to exist, and you don't push up against it. And there's some really great techniques in motivational interviewing to help navigate some of that. Some of it can be just acknowledging that the resistance exists and being inquisitive about it, or not. If you have a great trusting relationship where you've actually worked with this person for a bit before, and now you're coming up against resistance, there's an opportunity also to do what's called amplified reflections, which almost like it blows up the resistance so the person can hear it and see it for what it is, and decide whether that's true for them or not. And they might turn around and say, actually, yeah, no, that's that's not actually what I want to be thinking or saying. It's interesting that I'm now seeing it in that light. But I think that has to happen only when there's really good trust between the coach and the coachee, because otherwise it can sound like doubt or sarcasm or some other kind of negative reflection towards the person. But there are some other great techniques as well.
Really appreciating this conversation about resistance and what that could mean. And I know that we have some other big fans of motivational interviewing amongst our panelists, and I know that and I'm going to go to Jan, who hasn't had a chance to speak quite yet in this section. Jan, if you wanted to talk about this, we've talked a lot about the self-awareness, self-assessment from a coachee's perspective. Putting yourself in the seat of the coach. Tell us about the kind of what's happening in your internal world. What does that look like in the moment that you're pursuing becoming an effective coach? Particularly, if you want to bring up things around shame, fear, not being enough that a lot of folks experience. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Isela. And I'm loving so much all the conversations around self-awareness and motivational interviewing. I'm writing down all your names that we can catch up later on and geek out about like MI and everything else. But yeah, Isela, I love this question. This is fresh in my heart and mind because this past week, we've been facilitating trainings for our peer academic counselors who are undergrad seeking to be academic counselors in EOP. And for me, what necessitated the change up in my trainings is that in the past, we've been hyper-focused on the needs of the coachees and not the coaches themselves, right? Conversations usually revolve around what does the coachee need and how can you as a coach support them? And there is this reality that there are two people in a coaching session, right? And therefore, two unique needs. Before we move on, I just want to thank the peers for giving me permission to share this with y'all today because it was a really interesting conversation. But we started being curious about what our peers needed when they enter into a coaching session as coaches, right? And the best way I found to ask this was asking, what are your fears when meeting with a coachee, right? What is the dreaded outcome you are anticipating as a coach, right? And here were some of the commonalities. Coaches said, I'm going to disappoint the person I'm coaching. The coachee is going to feel that it was a waste of their time, that they doubted if I was enough of an expert, enough of a leader, knew enough. Y'all, the fear was shame, right? The fear was disconnection of not being an expert enough, not knowledgeable enough, just not being enough, point blank. And so there was this aha moment of like, wow, our self-worth as coaches is really tied to the outcome of the coaching session, right? And just this reality that interpersonal risk isn't just for the coachee coming into the coaching session, it goes both ways. That coaching actually is very vulnerable for everybody involved, right? And so we started thinking more in our trainings of how do we consciously and unconsciously self-protect in anticipation of these fears, right? And here was the list. Being an expert allows me to self-protect, jumping into advice giving, information overload, wanting to fix that writing reflex, right? Jumping straight into solutions, creating an action plan prematurely with our coachee, everything that we're doing in service to the fear of the dreadful what if of just not being enough, right? Here's the MI piece. Motivational interviewing research has a list of behaviors called disengagement traps, right? On the part of coaches that actually research has proven shows leads coachees to display passivity, disengagement, and resistance, right? All the things that we don't want to see happen in a transformative, authentic coaching environment, right? The most powerful thing I realized was the list that me and the PACs came up with, the peers came up with of the ways we armor up to self-protect is the exact same list as ways we promote disengagement through disengagement traps in motivational interviewing, right? I can go on and on. This was a 3-part training after all with our peers, but my hope is that we're able to be curious about our needs as a coach as much as the needs of who we're coaching, right? Questions like, do you feel like your self-worth is in danger? Is it tied to the outcome of this conversation, right? How do we usually protect ourselves from shame and what triggers our shame? And most importantly for me, how can we begin to let go of our armor so we can lean into vulnerability and have authentic coaching sessions. Yeah.
That was beautiful, Jan. Thank you for all of that and for bringing in your peer training at EOP into the conversation and explaining how we're working with students and how we work with each other, how we work within ourselves. I'm also really, really thankful for this conversation as far as like I've heard folks even sometimes in the Cal Coaching Network when we're asking for folks to step up to leadership and feeling like they're just not enough. Like I'm not an expert in coaching. I'm not a certified coach. I just wanted to mention that out there. And with that, I'm gonna go to Andrew. And Andrew, I'm curious if you can tell us of, you know, right now we've been talking about like students, kind of more of like staff. We have talked a little bit about other types of roles, and I'm curious in what you think about when should a manager be a coach, and when should someone else take on that role?
Yeah, I'm gonna give the typical academic answer that it really depends on the person when we go at that. But I think I'm gonna answer a slice of that question, which is there are certain things that managers can do to be, you know, effective coaches and to really think about, you know, their employees' well-being. And I think one thing that managers can do to kind of, you know, get people to, you know, engage in a brave space like their reports is to really make it clear as to like, you know, when parts of our conversation are part of performance evaluation and what parts are not. Because sometimes like, you know, when, you know, just based on the work I've been doing, I've noticed that sometimes when like some reports work with managers, they might be scared to, you know, be brave, to take chances, to take risks, to make mistakes, and to, you know, acknowledge, you know, areas of growth, right? So, you know, when a manager can really say, okay, like, you know, like these feedback sessions that we're having, like this is a part performance evaluation. I'm here to support you. I'm here to work in partnership with you to kind of meet you where you're at. Having that kind of language and to kind of also like, you know, create confidentiality, to be clear about confidentiality. That's one way to really kind of start to build rapport and trust and to really understand like the values, the beliefs and the attitudes that the person is coming in with. So you understand what energizes them, what makes them feel valued, fulfilled and connected to their work. So you kind of like really engage their interest with developing, you know, the competencies and to continuously grow. And I think the other thing that managers can really be aware of is pay attention to their language, right? Are you using highly evaluative language? Paying attention to your emotions. What type of tone are you using when you're giving feedback, right? You know, and being aware of intent versus impact, right? Sometimes we might want to like say, okay, we want to get things done really quickly. We might want to like, you know, make these deadlines. You might want to like really put the pressure on the pedal. But sometimes, you know, just being aware of, you know, the other person's emotions and their needs and just checking in with them and having just effective, you know, being clear about like time management and really being clear about the kind of feedback you're giving, right? Are we just kind of giving like open-ended feedback? Is that like in the wrong or right direction? Or are we kind of offering suggestions and are we providing like effective modeling? I think the other in terms of like, you know, where a manager may not be, you know, where you might want to go outside and find another coach, like find an actual coach outside of a manager, is when you're starting to think about like, you know, your career development, right? Because sometimes some people don't feel comfortable talking about the ways they want to move around in their career, right? And sometimes what they might want to do is talk about that with a career coach, right? And to really think about have like a confidential space to really, you know, take chances, take risk, ideate, start to really look inward and outward in terms of the reflection, and to have someone really do that amplified reflection practice that Liat was talking about earlier. So, you know, that's kind of one space where I've seen that's kind of happened, because one thing I've noticed just based on my work is sometimes a lot of people are scared to really talk about, you know, career challenges with their managers. And the last few questions I want to throw out is, you know, if you're a manager working to support, you know, people in your reports, some questions to really think about is like, you know, have you really clarified your work expectations? You know, have you made the following explicit to your employees? Like, have you made your biases or assumed ways of thinking in your work expectations and performance evaluation clear? And have you gave criteria that really clearly defines what success means, right? And, you know, are you promoting self-reflection and effective, independent, but also interdependent and collaborative work, right? You know, how are we, you know, creating connections and spaces for people to work with each other, right? And then, you know, what actions are you taking to really understand your new perspectives, to really enhance your emotional intelligence, right? Like, how are you being emotionally aware And really, how do you provide an actionable feedback, right? How do you consider intent versus impact, right? And what decisions have you made to really create that brave space for learning and to connect employees together and to kind of create a space where they have a sense of belonging, a sense of agency, and a sense of purpose and relevance to the work that they're doing. So, those are different ways in which we can really start to like look inward and outward as managers to really start to meet employees where they're at.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for also incorporating like what managers can do into that question. That's super, super helpful. And I believe that one of our maybe newer managers is Alicia. Is that right, Alicia? And I wanted to see from your perspective, if you can talk about like from this perspective now that you're a manager, right? And also thinking of like relationships that you've built on campus with peers. I know that you're a very well-respected colleague amongst the advising community. And I'd like you to please reflect on what individuals can do to be better coaches, and thinking also about the ecology of the institution, like the environment, and how that might support them in becoming better coaches or the coaches that they want to be.
Yeah, newbie manager, I guess by title, but not necessarily by practice, because I you know what, I don't even know if I like to use the frame manager. It's just what happens to be in the position description. Yeah, in terms of, it's all about that self-reflection, like Andrew was talking about in the other panelists, and I think it's even more critical when you kind of move formally into a position that has that sort of title of manager or that responsibility of manager, because yes, we are here to support people in their work, but I think it's really important to reverse that equation, and that we're not supporting the work, we're supporting the people first. We're supporting the people to be able to do the work. And to be able to do that has to be an understanding of what that means for yourself internally, and what are sort of my, like Andrew's saying, what are my biases, and what sort of positionality do I bring in this? What's the power dynamics here? Being able to really be aware of that, be aware of sort of the context with which I'm working, the community with which I'm working, the advising community has its own sort of dynamics. And so being aware of that and how to support the people that are wanting to do that work. And so I think for me, it's about tending to the person first, and making sure that the emotional components of all of this are recognized and honored, and creating a space where we're both talking about work, but we're talking about it from the perspective of sort of the person that's doing the work, and honoring that. And in terms of sort of the environment and supporting that, there is a very important recognition that has to happen, that we have sort of parameters with which we're able to do this. And sometimes it's restrictive parameters in terms of volume of work or time that we have able to do this. But I think it's more about finding those spaces to move with the intention of a coaching approach, right? It might not be like a formal, I'm going in for an hour coaching session, but coming in with the mindset always of, I'm here to support people's growth and development. And how can I pull from my coaching training, my coaching perspective to help support that? So even if it's not, we're sitting and having a very formal coaching session because we have, this event coming up that we have to plan or whatever, it still could always be brought from that place of with the intentionality of it, right? And understanding that the way in which I move in my position has a direct impact in the way in which people feel about their own work. And that's what coaching has helped me give that perspective. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Alicia. And you're getting +1s in the chat. So I'm gonna go back to Winnie for a moment. And thinking about kind of, I know that your role is you've managed a lot of people. It sounds like you're like a rock star coach in your own right, in your own sphere of influence. And reflecting on your own experience with being coached, like being the coachee, and how has that influenced your approach to coaching?
So many ways, and I want to just lift up all the great insights that my colleagues on the panel also gave. So many ways, and I'll talk about it from time, space, and environment. And I think, Andrew, you mentioned brave spaces, right? What does it look like? Time. What time is it? And what is my emotional capabilities in that moment as a coachee. Now, if you manage a lot of people and you have that different diversity of groups in your world, coaching becomes very essential. But you have to find it in different ways, which is why I talk time, space, and you may not have one coach that might give you everything. You may not have one shoe fits all. You may have coaching in certain aspects that you need. For instance, if I have union employees and I have to work on something that is on my mind and is impacting my ability to manage, then I'll have to look for a coach that has that skills that would help me for just that moment, for that time, to address that issue. Or if I have something that is more long-term, let's say I have a path to advance from where I am today to a different, then I may need a different coach that might help me with that as well. But it all comes back to me as the individual, which I think all my colleagues have said, is what is my level of discovery, or what is my level of openness or vulnerability for this, because being in your position as a leader sometimes also brings some level of I have done it and I know, and doesn't give you a sense of being that vulnerable. Even though we talk about vulnerability in so many ways, it's not very easy when a lot of people are looking up to you, some for direction and all that, and they are so diverse and they have so many different areas that you're working at a long time, over a time. So my thought for leaders is, just create that space for you just to reflect what's more important, right? Just take a pause in time and give yourself that moment to say what is important and try to prioritize. Don't give everything and put it in and say you're going to do that. No, and it's okay also sometimes to allow yourself to fail. Not fail enough to disrupt, but fail enough for you to know you're human, because that's why you are in that position. And so for me, that's kind of what I've done. And I've had different coaches in different times of my life. And when it's time for them to move on to another, I do so, respectfully, and also knowing my time, and just when it's time and when, so I don't know if I answered your question.
Oh yeah, absolutely. When you have a follow-up question for you, as you're talking about the kind of diversity of approach of what people need, and the whole panel is talking about the different needs, and the coaching is driven by individuals, like it completely depends. And I'm hearing you kind of talk about kind of some of the approaches that you take as coaching. And I'm also curious, we were talking about resistance earlier, and if you had any thoughts on what some of those factors might be that are playing into the resistance. And particularly, I was thinking, I picked up on the diversity piece, and I'm just curious for you what that might be.
Well, that is, and I want to kind of, that's a very interesting, and I know my colleagues have talked about it, but I will start from a place of appeal, and I think, Andrew, you are the one who said there's two people in this conversation. There are really two people in this conversation. So the coach, how they come in, and the coachee, how they come in, have this intersection of, are they really aligned, right? Because there's vulnerability there. And so most of the times, especially when it comes to diversity and inclusiveness and how people feel, there's a lot of biases that kind of prevents us from there, right? So if I'm going in a space and I have certain experiences that have informed me or made me feel disappointed, and I approach it and somebody comes to me, so I could be a coach or I could be a coachee. So let's say I'm a coachee and I go into a space where I have these experiences that were in my past, and I hear language that reflect those experiences. I just tune out immediately, because it doesn't even matter, but the language that start pouring out in a space already has violated everything that I believe about the person, right? So there's always this appeal of making sure you're checking in. It's the same with a coach as well. So if a coach comes in and, a coachee comes in and they've had experiences and they start talking about something and I've dealt with it and the outcome wasn't as expected, I'm also going to start building my defense, right? And I'm going to kind of go in again. So it's this very place of sometimes it's hard for us to kind of really understand what's going on. So is everybody a good coach? Sometimes, you know, in the moment you may not be, and it's okay to say, you know, I think let's give it a time. Or maybe this issue that you bring in, maybe we should find somebody else probably who can relate to it, right? So give that person an option of an opt-out versus trying to really make it work, because you're causing more damage than good, right? And I have had instances where I'm talking to the coach and all I want to do is, when am I going to get out? Or I've had a coachee that I'm like, oh my God, I think I'm not making any sense. And how do I stop, right? So it's learning how to be sensitive enough to say, hey, you know, let me check in with you. Is it something that we are really getting through, or am I missing why you're here? And if not, that's okay. You know, I would appreciate it. All I want to do is to be helpful and not, you know, you can't say, I don't want to be harmful, but you want to say, I want to be helpful. So let's see how, give the person an opt-out. And I think sometimes it helps.
Thank you so much for that. I'm sensing maybe that Jan, you may have some follow-up thoughts to what you just heard Winnie talk about. And also I have a, if whether you do or not, I also am curious, I'm hearing Winnie talk about the very many coaches that she's had, and kind of like thinking of, okay, when is the appropriate time to end and move forward respectfully. And I'm curious if you could tell us too, besides the reaction to what Winnie just said, what your experience with formal and informal coaches may have been. Like, has everybody in your life who's been a coach to you been a formal relationship?
Yeah. I feel like that's a leading question, Isela, because you were my coach. So yeah, I've had fantastic coaches, including Isela.
You were my coach, Jen.
We're each other's coaches. But yes, Winnie, I popped in the chat, psychological safety, right? Like this idea that there is interpersonal risk happening when we're in a coaching session. And to what degree are we keeping in mind that, you know, like when we're asking someone to be coach or to be coaches, that it's actually asking them to be vulnerable, you know? And so a lot of my work, background experience in coaching happens in my work with first generation, low income, historically underrepresented students who are experiencing academic difficulty, right? Students who are in academic probation, subject to dismissal, but also students who were dismissed, withdrawn, and are readmitting, right? And I thought initially coming into this role that the assignment was to coach EOP students to return to baseline in their academics and reach their academic goals. That's what I thought. That when we think about academic probation students, the primary need is assumed to be that there are things they should know about, like policies, resources, services, and that there are skills they should work on, time management, test taking, research. My voice and approach had to shift in realizing that the goal for many of our students is not to know more and to do more. The question was, do you feel connected, right? Because we know that our students do better academically when they're able to engage authentically with their courses, with their community resources, with themselves. But that authentic engagement requires vulnerability. Brene Brown, who we quote a lot in our course, defines vulnerability as our capacity to show up and be seen, right? To enter into interpersonal risk. For EOP students, Black and Brown students, as part of being a vulnerable student population, have many reasons to not want to be vulnerable in academic spaces or coaching spaces, right? That EOP students may want to be guarded, to be armored up in protection of what's tender, of what's been in danger in the recent past, right? And something to think about as coaches is that self-preservation becomes self-sabotage when the armor gets in the way of connection. So as a coach, when my main goal in a session shifted from skill acquisition into building up our capacity to be vulnerable so that we can have authentic engagements, then my approach had to radically change, right?
Thank you so much, Jen. And I'm going to ask a similar question to Angela. Angela, can you talk about some of the relationships with coaches that you've had, whether they've been formal and informal, and maybe talk about if there's been a difference between the two?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have had a formal coaching relationship actually through a partner that we use here on campus called Better Up. And I've also had a number of informal coaching relationships throughout my career, and, you know, all the kind of other relationships we've talked about. And I think, you know, informal coaching and formal coaching are a little bit different. And for me anyways, when I went into the formal coaching, I probably got myself a little more amped up. Like I was like, okay, I have things that I'm gonna do, and I have this list, and this, you know, this person, this is their job, and I'm gonna, you know, I was really gung-ho on that coaching relationship. And some of the more informal relationships felt a little more natural. They felt a little bit more like a conversation, you know, where I was just asking a lot of questions, but having those questions pushed back at me so that I had to answer them fully. And so I think for me anyways, the difference was really about maybe that the level of preparation that I did, or the level of what I was looking to get out of it. But, you know, I don't want to say that informal coaching relationships can't be that powerful, because they can be. You know, I have had some very, very powerful informal coaching, particularly at the peer level, like peer coaching. When I came to Berkeley 3.5 years ago, I had a lot of informal coaching just to help me understand Berkeley and help me understand my role and help me understand what it was that I wanted to do to add value to Berkeley. You know, and those kind of informal relationships were really, really powerful. And as we think about those ending, I don't think that, particularly for the informal coaching relationships, that there's this like, okay, book closed, it's done, it's ended. You know, they can certainly go on hiatus or sabbatical maybe, but I will say that staying connected to the folks in my network that have helped me to be reflective, that have helped me to build my own skills and thinking about how I want to build my personal professional network, staying connected to those folks has been really, really important. And having relationships where maybe, you know, it's kind of like your best friend. Maybe you don't speak with them for a year. Maybe we haven't seen those folks for a year or two, particularly with all of the world crises that have been going on. But when you do pick up the phone, or when you do make that connection, you start right where you left off. I think that's when you know you have a really strong relationship, be it with a coach or a friend or a mentor. If you can get to the place where you don't have to check in every week, but you know that when you really need that help, you can pick up the phone, you can send the email, you can just pop by and have that conversation and feel like you've started right where you left off, regardless of the time. I think that's really powerful. So they can end, I get, I'm gonna stick with what I said. They don't end, they just maybe go on hiatus or sabbatical. That's awesome, Angela. I feel like what you just said right there at the end, especially about kind of picking up where you left off, and you know that you've formed like a really good relationship, a strong relationship, a deep connection, is really resonating with me. And I'm looking at the people on this panel and I'm like, click, 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 you know, just like, that's right. I may not always like, you know, but having that foundation is so important, is what I'm hearing. And I keep hearing from the panelists about trust, right? And so that's so important. Curious from Andrew, if you would also like to give us some insight about some of your formal versus informal coaching relationships, what those may have looked like, maybe the difference between the two.
That's a great question. So I think when I think about formal, I think I'm going to talk about the synergies and then the differences. I found the most powerful coaching relationships, both informal and formal, on when you know, someone really tried to kind of clarify what my goals were, engage in deep listening and partnership, actually worked with me and didn't just ask me a bunch of questions, you know, and but ask more, like didn't just ask a bunch of questions. And I'm going to caveat this one. And I thought this was and I think it's good to ask really like questions that are going to be targeted in advancing a conversation forward, right? So asking questions that really help you understand, really help the coach understand my goals. And sometimes that was motivational interviewing, sometimes it wasn't. So sometimes there were like leading questions, sometimes there were non-leading questions, but really someone who really tried to understand my current reality relative to these goals. Someone who really tried to understand my passions, my skills, my strengths, my values, who I wanted to become, but also who I feared becoming, right? And also what were my barriers to those goals, right? Someone who really tried to understand what was my possible self? What were my different capitals that Yasa would call it, right? What was my current navigational capital? How was I looking at my networks? Where was I stuck? Someone who probably really reflects on, Andrew, what relationships energize you? What relationships are toxic? What kind of, interactions are really supportive to your success and which ones aren't? And then someone who really just adapted their practices based on their understanding of me to really personalize options and resources, referred to me to different networks, and really try to understand their own emotions and try to understand mine, to really think about how are they then, going to take that a step further to really iterate, right? And one thing I've noticed is that sometimes like I felt the coaches who've really helped me a lot is one that really helped me find a framework by looking at different frameworks, helped me develop a framework that worked for me that I was able to iterate over time, where I was able to really evaluate practices and really figure out, okay, like these time management sequences work, like creating these weekly meetings at these intervals, with the Google Calendar invite, like that really works for me, right? And really identifying really what doesn't work, and then, developing like a framework to really self-assess and self-evaluate that over time. I think that was something that's really been transformative for me, that I've seen happen both with formal and informal mentors that I've just found be very powerful. And I, to be honest, like I'm gonna kind of vibe with, roll with the conversation that's been going. But like one thing that all coaches really help me figure out is to really help me reflect on my perspective. Because I'm a big fan of Trent Shelton, and one thing that he says is your perspective could be your power or your prison. And to me, that's huge, because sometimes, we're so stuck into something, but something that to zoom out. And I think that's where I found formal and informal coaches have been really helpful at helping me do. And that's been transformative for my life.
Andrew, thank you for that. And I just want to say how powerful that what you said about somebody just asked the question, what relationships have been motivational? Which relationships have been toxic? I mean, that is straight up like, tell me what works, what doesn't, is one way of framing it, but to actually say what's been motivational or inspirational and what's been toxic, like this is very real. And so, thank you for sharing that. It's something that I wrote down for my toolkit, and hope that, I know that can be actually, I think it could be for some folks a tough question to ask, because it could also be opening up a can of worms, especially if some of the things around toxicity come up within the workplace and it's like the same institution or anything like that. And here again is where I'm hearing that trust, relationship building depth is key. And with that, I think I'm going to thank the panelists so far for all the amazing wisdom and your perspective and your experiences and your stories. And I'm going to ask Colin if you could help me out with the chat and see if we have any questions for our panelists.
Yeah, thank you so much, Isela. I love it. One of the questions that was brought forward earlier was around some examples for questions you might use to gauge level of trust. I think that's it's an important question. It's a challenging one, but maybe we can get some ideas from the community in the chat, but also from you, Isela, as well as some of our panelists.
How about Liat? I don't know if did you hear that question?
Yeah. I mean, when I think about how I do it, I'm not necessarily asking a direct question of the coachee. Typically, I'm observing body language. I'm noticing whether someone relaxes, if their breath deepens, if their posture has shifted, in a way that's a little more open. I'm also doing a lot of the work of rapport building. So I'm being intentional, especially up front, but all throughout. And so I'm really watching to see if those efforts are working or not. And typically what I'm also observing in terms of the verbal indicators is that people start sharing more information, more vulnerable information, right? They're willing to start talking about the things that are scarier or harder, or expressing emotions that are more vulnerable. So fear, distress, or things around self-confidence. So a lot of times somebody might come into the session and say, I have a problem that I need to fix, and keep it kind of at that very surface level of, strategic and problem. And when they start being able to talk about the fears and the anxieties that are attached to it, a lot of what Jan was talking about, demonstrating that they have psychological safety with me, I'm looking for those cues. So it might not be sort of a scale. I wouldn't ask a scale question on a scale of 1 to 10, 0 to 10, how much do you trust me right now? That would not be my approach personally.
Thank you so much, Liat. Talking about observation, bringing in body language, then incorporating what you're hearing from folks. And it looks like Alicia might have some insights as well to this.
Yeah, Liat, your comment reminds me how, what is it? This might be a fake statistic, but 90% of our communication is nonverbal, and really watching that. And yeah, I would echo the same thing, that it's not necessarily about a specific question, but trust really is built more through actions. Our actions really do speak volumes. And even just the way in which we hold the space for somebody communicates a level of trust. And what I found really powerful is validation, and how when people are sharing things that are deep, and if you've created a space where they feel kind of like they're testing the water, and they'll say something, and how you respond to that really is what builds that level of trust. And if there's that sense of validation, if there's that sense that they're being seen and heard in a very genuine way, that is what builds the trust. And I've been a part of a year-long mindfulness program through the East Bay Meditation Center, and I'm going to pull a quote from the lead teacher that I loved so much, and it has to do with trust. And she talks about moving at the speed of trust, right? That trust is the thing that actually should be guiding the whole process, and that you're tuning into, and that's what's going to drive the process, and that's what's going to determine the speed. So we talk about like the resistance stuff, how you respond to resistance also builds that level of trust, and you just have to sort of trust in the process. And I know it sounds cliche, but that really is how that trust is built. So not necessarily through the words, but through the actions and the ways that you show up for the person.
Alicia, and it seems like something that you've said has really kind of inspired someone to kind of lead up on what you're saying. And so, Andrew, I wanted to give you that space.
Yeah. So one thing that I've seen through my research and just my work is people in coaching situations might say one thing to you. It may feel a completely different way. And I think that's something to really always be aware of in no matter what relationship we're kind of in, whether it's been a long relationship that's been there for a while and one that's shorter. Because, some people, depending on the power dynamics or how things might work, they might say one thing but feel another, right? But one thing that I've kind of seen I haven't seen like a perfect solution for this. But one thing that I've seen that has been helpful for building trust is just clear. Again, I want to build on what Alicia said, which is really showing, not just, I would say showing and telling actually. Sorry if that sounds kind of kindergartner-ish, but I think there's value in it still, even as a man now. But I think showing that creating spaces around confidentiality. And one way that people really, just based on the work I've been doing, if I've noticed that people tend to trust people less who are kind of leaking information about other people, so not doing that in a conversation, but also being clear, and also being clear that I've got your back, right? And also being vulnerable, around career growth, right? Like one thing that I've often seen in some of my work is some people, if they're switching careers, they might tell their managers, hey, like my career is great with you, right? I love being here. But if they're thinking of switching careers, they might not, they've actually expressed to me that they might actually not say that. to their manager, because they're, concerned that, that might harm their relationship in one way, shape, or form. But then, what I've noticed is that there are some managers who are saying kind of like, hey, like, I'm being vulnerable. This is how I've shifted my career growth. And, and I want to support you in being who you want to be, because I want you to be as productive as possible. And I don't see, you being here with me as the final step in your life. I've seen that some people tend to kind of buy into that, some don't. But like for the ones who did, like I've noticed that actually was pretty transformative, and just kind of building that level of trust. And I think the other thing that also kind of can build trust is just managers who are willing to kind of collect feedback, not search who gave that feedback, and to really act on the feedback. Finding some sort of anonymous mechanism that isn't collected by a manager, but something external. And that can actually be pretty helpful, in building trust. Because I often don't even see those in a lot of workplaces. But, just collecting that and letting people just voice, and then actually say, okay, this is what I'm going to do to, make this place a more energizing, less toxic, and powerful space, right? Or you realize that your employees are lost, and you're thinking about, okay, it feels like a maze without a map. How am I going to restructure that maze into a highway towards greater access, equity, and inclusion within this space, to really start thinking about, how can I be as supportive as I can for you? To really think about, okay, what's blocking you and what's not? And then how can I unblock you, as someone who I'm trying to support? So that, I think trying to identify those through as many ways as possible, I think is key for managers to know. And then the other thing is thinking about performance metrics. I think that can also impact trust. If we're highly overvaluing like independence sometimes, like if it's overvalued and doesn't have a good balance with interdependence, that can also, mitigate trust in many ways. Because then some people may be less forthright, maybe less brave, and that can actually, be a huge deterrent to people wanting to innovate and bring in new, fresh ideas that are going to really move the organization and change the organization forward.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for speaking about feedback. And what I heard from you was talking about asking for feedback, and then not everyone's going to be as comfortable, being really, really honest about that feedback directly to their manager. And so also thinking about mechanisms that could anonymize that or could neutralize some of that feedback. I'm thinking what you're saying is making me think of how, managers, or I as a supervisor may not even realize that I'm collecting this feedback in a way that could be influencing and then biasing, influencing my bias towards somebody. And so something to be continually mindful of, and aware that we work within an institution that is, the foundations are, white supremacy. And a lot of that can be really toxic. And so like kind of knowing that we're working within the system, and then also thinking continuously and constantly about how am I doing this, and how can I do this in a way that's arresting that bias. I wonder if any of the panelists, I wonder if maybe Winnie, if you have any thoughts about that, about seeking feedback in a way that feels a little bit more safe for people.
Yes, I think that is that's very important, seeking feedback. And I would even go further and say, as a coach, try your best to do a check-in, right? If your coachee, you have a plan and you're saying, okay, we will call, we'll check in every week, every other week, every month, and you had one conversation that you felt was a little bit hard, give it about 72 hours and just check in. Hey, Winnie, how are you feeling today? Don't go back and revisit all the bad conversations, because, just say, how are you doing today? Just check in, a little email, a little note sometimes help, In terms of feedback, I think one thing that, you want to do is you also want to make sure that those feedback do align with what you're doing. Because remember that the whole process of coaching is growth, right? So as you make it safe for the person, you also have to help the person build that self advocacy for themselves, have to be able to build their own capacity to be able to grow in a way that it's not so harsh for them, but it's in their own time. So that feedback should align, and it should also be more tangible for them. Sometimes we give feedback that is kind of, Winnie, you have to be a little bit more kind. What does that mean? right? Or you're being too tough on yourself. What does that mean? Be a lot more constructive, right? You know, you're working on this, I understand, but maybe you want to prioritize this, or, you know, give a little bit more concrete, because some people in the feedback, they want something that they can take and apply, not something that is conceptual, that they have to rethink about it. So that's kind of very, very important in terms of giving feedback to a person. And for you, the coach, you also have to think about, is that feedback being impactful? Because sometimes feedback could not be. It's just, you know, we're giving feedback, right? No, is it impactful? So when you meet again, try to find out from the other person, the coach, the coachee, was that helpful for you? What did you do differently? You know, so that you can kind of tie it all together. Because again, it's a learning journey for that person.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Winnie, for adding to that. And Andrew, I think, wanted to share something. And after that, I actually wanted to ask Angela about some resources that you might be aware of on campus. So we're going to share with Andrew and then go to Angela.
Oh, can you all see my screen, or is it taking a little bit longer? Okay, so I do research on feedback, actually. And so I do consulting work, and I've also looked at management and also student learning. And I've actually seen feedback that's actually vague versus actionable. So we have the low scale of, like, if you're just telling people something's right or wrong, it's hard for people to know what to do. You give them a reason, it's a little bit clear. A suggestion, it's even more clear. An example of a suggestion, that's even better. But if you give this is what Winnie literally just said, an example of a suggestion to a work, a task, or a project that aligns with my values and priorities, we're more likely going to do it, right? Like, you know, and this is kind of very much akin to like Google Docs, right? Like, can someone give you suggestions, like suggested edits, versus a comment that says awkward? Like, we're more likely going to, you know, engage with the suggested edit more than just having some vague comments. So like, that's one thing to really start thinking about. But also, I want to add a caveat to this, like intent versus impact. People may not always forget what you said or did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel, for Maya Angelou, right? And that's so key, because I've seen the amazing relationships just fall apart, you know, over just some really, you know, feedback that wasn't really well thought out or calibrated. But sometimes when you're giving like ways to just move forward, like at this five scale that I've kind of worked on, I've seen that it can typically be very beneficial and transformative. Anyways, I'll stop there. But this is so exciting, everybody.
Thank you, Andrew. That's beautiful to have a visual to go along with Winnie's wisdom, and then you adding that caveat is really helpful. I think if we could stop sharing your screen at this moment. Thank you so much. And I'm going to open up to Angela. And again, continuing on that through line of feedback. Any thoughts you have on that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the things that I did when I came to Berkeley was run around and do a listening tour, hear what was happening. And one of the things that really concerned me those years ago was that I heard that 360s were being used evaluatively. So they were being used for performance evaluation. A manager who didn't want to have a courageous conversation, didn't want to have a brave conversation with an employee, was asking to have a 360 done so that the feedback would come back through the 360 so that the manager could then say, now I think that Colin, you're great, but hey, look what the 360 said, so you need to fix this thing. But this isn't me, this is 360. 360. 360 should never be used. And as an academic, I very rarely use the term never or always, but I will say that again. 360s should never be used for a performance evaluation, ever. 360s are developmental. They're a way to gather feedback that you take in yourself, often with the help of a coach, to learn about how what you're intending is being perceived, picking up on what Andrew was saying about that intention versus perception. And so we made a big push at People and Culture on the People and Organization Development team to change the way that 360s were being used. One of the things that I did was send 5 of my staff to a coaching certification program on how to help people evaluate the results of a 360 to really be a truly developmental experience. And so if anybody is looking for that kind of a 360 developmental experience, that's something that we do now for individual clients within People and Culture. You can come to our Grow Your Impact team and say, I'm interested in getting a 360, and we'll help you think about who you ask for feedback, what you do with that feedback when it comes back, how you turn that into a development plan for yourself. And know that when we do that, your report is never shared with your manager. It's not shared with the people that gave you the feedback. This is strictly confidential between you and your coach. In fact, we've partnered with a vendor because we don't even at People and Culture, we don't even want to own that information. It's not kept on campus. Your report is strictly confidential. And so we've changed the way that we can do those individual 360s, and we've incorporated that process into a couple of our programs. So our Berkeley People Management Grow the Organization program, which is our senior leadership program, incorporates that 360 experience, as does our Berkeley People Management Executive Coaching experience, which incorporates that 360 process with then matching you with a coach within People and Culture to work through your report, and an external coach from BetterUp to work with for 6 months on, once you've developed your development plan, implementing that development plan. So there are a number of ways that we are helping, or we're there to partner with you to do a true 360 evaluative, or not, I'm sorry, not evaluative, developmental experience. And we've incorporated it to some programs, but also just have it as a standalone offer, if that's something that anybody's interested in.
Awesome. Thank you, Angela, for all of that and telling us what the People and Culture are doing to actually make this happen. I know that there's some costs associated with some things, and sometimes departments can foot the bill for professional development and things like that. So thank you for that. I know I've benefited from the BPM Executive Coaching Program. I'm just finishing up my coaching session with BetterUp. Really, really awesome. And I wanted to see, I know that we're almost at time, and I wanted to see if Jan, if you had any other thoughts based on kind of like the last things that you heard here. You're good? You're good, okay, awesome. So I'm gonna go ahead and ask Colin if you can share the slides that we have, the slide deck that we have. And I just wanted to show the coaching resources that we have on our slide deck. So again, a link to the slide deck that I'm reading off of today is in the BCAL event itself. There's a link there, and we have a bunch of coaching resources. So are we able to see the slide here? Let's see. So thank you so much. Perfect. And then the other thing that's happening is that I think Katie just dropped the survey, our assessment for today, in the chat. Thank you so much for doing that, Katie. So there's a link to the Cal Coaching Network website for continuing, to come to sessions like this, and also practices, one-on-one career coaching, the career support with UC Berkeley staff who are certified coaches. So we have a bunch of certified coaches now on campus. Cal Coaching Network, coaching skills development and peer coaching practices, I mentioned. Berkeley People Management Executive Coaching Program, which Angela just mentioned, and a coaching circles startup guide that folks can actually start in smaller places in your units. So please fill out the CCN interest form to get our newsletter and information about the events. And as I said, the survey is in the chat, and we will be following up an email as well. All right, and our very last slide here. All right, and so we just wanted to say thank you. So first of all, thank you so much to Winnie, Liat, Jan, Angela, Andrew, Alicia. It has been just such a pleasure to talk with you all. Just so many words of wisdom, and just an admiration and an awe of you as people, as humans, and also as professionals. So thank you so much, everybody. We will be following up with an assessment and an email, just so that you have some of this information in your inbox. Thank you.